Okay, moving forward, I would like to talk about lifestyles. In regard to lifestyle, it's important to point out that in our current system, the traditional family is broken, with both parents having to work in order to survive. Monetary economics undermines family cohesion and childcare. Stress is always very high due to medical bills, insurance, education costs, employment insecurity, and living costs in general. In a resource-based economy, the integrity of the family will be returned. Concurrently, the cultural values of society as a whole would undergo profound change. With the monetary system outgrown and the world working together to produce an abundance and a sustainable practice for all the citizens of Earth, activities we appreciate will greatly expand. For the amount of human freedom will be unlike anything we know today. Not to mention our motivation will be dramatically altered from taking to giving to society. That is what's rewarded. Now, one of the more in-depth changes in values and lifestyle will be the way people think about property. And I know this is a sensitive point. In most of the world today, property is a powerful concept, with people often associating their social status to what they own. Excuse me. As stated before, the monetary system requires cyclical consumption to function. This naturally leads to the need for people to be manipulated into thinking they want or need a particular good or service. With the powerful tactics of modern advertising, most in the world support an artificial, materialistic value system that entails wanting more and more goods and services, often regardless of necessity or utility. This influence will no longer exist. There is no reason for us to manipulate each other anymore.
Communism. Woo. Oh, yeah.
Not to mention that in a resource-based economy, there is no reason for property. And you know, you can throw out labels about this system in regards to social ideas that have existed in the past, but until you address the reasoning that these ideas came from, until you look at the train of thought, the arrival of conclusions based on tangible, unfolding intellectual inference, then there's no point to even consider that this has anything to do with anything else. Moving on, back to my point, there is no reason for property in a resource-based economy. Property is an outgrowth of scarcity. People who had to work very hard to create or obtain a product or resource in turn protected it because it had value relative to the labor entailed along with the scarcity associated. Property is not an American or capitalist idea. It is a primitive mental perspective generated from generations of scarcity. People claim ownership because it is simply a legal form of protection. In fact, it is a form of controlled restriction. In a systems approach designed to produce efficiency and abundance, without the need for money, the idea of ownership becomes absolutely irrelevant and extremely impractical. In this new system, no one owns anything. Instead, everyone has access to everything. Ownership is a massive burden. No longer will you need to live in one place. You could travel the world constantly, getting what you need as you go along. Anything that's needed is obtained without restriction. We hoard things in our current culture. We have houses and apartments full of junk that we're afraid to get rid of because we know they have some kind of monetary value. And again, there's no reason for abuse in such a system because there's nothing to gain. You can't steal things that no one owns, and you certainly couldn't sell them. In this system, without the need for money, the idea of ownership becomes irrelevant. It is a shared system. In this model, the city complex, or in fact, the entire world, is really your home. If you require an automobile for whatever reason, the car is made available to you. When you get to your destination, the satellite-based driving system, which we do have today, we can drive cars with satellite. The car will automatically be made available to you and then be made available to others after you're finished, as opposed to sitting in some parking lot for likely 80% of the life of the automobile. This is what we do. We waste so many resources and so much space with this primitive concept of personal ownership. To put it into a phrase, the resources of the planet become common heritage to all the world's people. It's important to point out, as we've previously denoted, that in society today, the need for property results in extreme product overlap, planned obsolescence, and redundant waste. There are many people today that criticize what we talk about without giving any reference to how sick the current establishment really is. It is much more intelligent, much more logical, and utterly much more responsible and practical to create a universal shared system, for it would dramatically reduce waste, redundancy, and increase efficiency in space exponentially compared to what we are doing today. And this leads us to our final section, part 4, the transition. Unfortunately, regardless of how well-reasoned, clear and obvious any new idea may be, the public today still maintains, on average, a tremendous fear of any form of social change. This is largely due to the propaganda and indoctrination which has been pushed upon them by the various establishment powers, which, of course, prefer to maintain their power. In fact, it really isn't the technical understandings and implementation of the physical attributes that comprise a resource-based economy which is the problem. What we're describing is nothing more than the practical application of known methods. And even if we couldn't do certain things right now, it's the reasoning that's important. It's the methodology we should be using that I hope everyone here thoroughly understands. The problem, in fact, is the opposing cultural values of society. That is what stands in the way. The ingrained patterns and uninformed nature of the conditioned culture. This is the most difficult aspect to consider when we talk about moving from point A to point B. And this is where the Zeitgeist movement, an organization I work with, comes in. We are the activist communication arm of the Venus Project. We are here to spread statistical information and socially positive value identifications in the hope of bringing people into an awareness of the incredibly positive possibilities the future can hold. Once these understandings are fully realized, I really believe that most people will never be able to look at the world today in the same way. And the problems we find as commonplace today will become simply unacceptable, motivating change. I would like to quickly point out that the term zeitgeist is defined as the general intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of an era. The term movement very simply implies motion or change. Therefore, the Zeitgeist movement is thus an organization which urges change in the dominant intellectual, moral, and cultural climate of the time, specifically to values and practices which would better serve the well-being of the whole of humanity, regardless of race, religion, creed, or any other form of contrived social status. We are, again, in effect, the educational and activist arm of Jacques Fresco's Venus Project, working to unify the world in this common direction. To date, we have about 360,000 members operating in about 100 regional chapters over about 200 countries, which is pretty good considering the movement's only been around for about 9 or 10 months.